So we are tackling some social issues in this second edition of our Fireside Chats here. Though no fireplace, but we are having a great time this afternoon. And today we're talking about racial tension, not only in this country, but here in San Diego. My name is Jen, and I'm joined here by the lead pastor of Grace Church, Tim Scott. Thank you for being here.
Glad to be here. I'm waiting for the fire. It's a little cold in here.
Yeah, I know. We need to get a fireplace in this room. So racial tension has been an issue for centuries, quite frankly, but it has kind of come back to the forefront. And in fact, this week in San Diego, there was a protest and a march downtown for a bunch of different social issues. But the Black Lives Matter movement was present in that. And this Sunday, at both campuses, you are going to be talking about racial reconciliation and the Black Lives Matter movement, and talking frankly, because I think this is an issue that some people feel awkward about talking about, or they don't want to approach racial issues. And it's something that is really in our forefront. So talk to me in your opinion about why this is important, not only just for San Diegans, but Christians specifically.
So I think that the problem is that Christians think that that's an issue. Well, churches, we have black churches, we have Hispanic churches, we have white churches. That's just the way it is. I don't think that's the way it should be. So let me just tell you a story from the Gospels. Jesus was speaking one day. His disciples are there. There's other people there. And these little kids were brought apparently by their parents so they could be touched by Jesus and prayed for. And the disciples go, "No, what are you doing?" And they forbade them. They actually rebuked them. And Jesus said, "Wait a minute, let those little kids come to me." And so they came up and he touched them, prayed for them, and he turned to the audience and he said, "This is the kingdom of heaven." What if the disciples had said, these children of the kingdom of heaven, and disciples said, "No, all people are a part of the kingdom of heaven." I think that's kind of where we go with this Black Lives Matter thing. We, white people especially, hear Black Lives Matter, and the rejoinder seems to be, well, I'll just say, all lives matter. Well, maybe on its face that sounds good, but it's actually a very insensitive thing to say. Some of the people are reacting to the movement, and I think that we as Christians need to make a distinction between the movement and that statement, because I've interviewed over 35 black people in the last 3 months to prepare for this message, and in doing that, all of them are concerned about the excesses of the Black Lives Matter, but don't understand why a rejoinder has to be, wait a minute, all lives matter. Jesus, every time he saw discrimination, he acted upon it, and that's what he did for these children. And, if a woman was to say to me, "My baby just died of cancer," and I say, "Well, a lot of babies die from cancer," you would go, "That's incredibly insensitive." And I think the problem is that most people in America don't understand what it's like to be black in America. And I say most people, some blacks, but mostly whites, don't understand that process. So Christians need to get on the right side of that and be on the forefront, because we are people about reconciliation, racially, culturally, whatever.
So let me stick on that all lives matter versus Black Lives Matter. So to that argument, it's saying that you're basically saying that their issue is not as important if you're saying, well, wait a second, we don't want to say Black Lives Matter, we want to say all lives matter, when in reality we should be kind of sitting in that, no, it's okay to say Black Lives Matter, because at this point in our culture, they are feeling more discriminated against.
Yeah, it's the context. The context of saying Black Lives Matter is because of the black condition in America. And so to say all lives matter, of course all lives matter. And the people I know don't think Black Lives Matter more than white lives matter. That's not what they're saying. They're saying, hey, Black Lives Matter too. And so some people would say, well, they should have said that. Well, listen, if you're in the midst of a world of discrimination and you grew up in that, you don't know how to respond to this other than to say, hey, look at us. That's exactly what Martin Luther King did, which I think was amazing.
Let me ask about some of the violence. Most of you know I work in media, and we get criticized for this a lot, that all the media shows is the negative violence, and I will agree, sometimes that is the case. And with some of these protests, sometimes for me as a white woman watching, I do get frustrated, speaking kind of frankly, because I look and I think, here you have a movement and these people are very passionate about that, and if there is an issue with racial discrimination in this country and in this city, and yet all we're seeing is then these people are out in the streets and they're looting or they're being violent, I think that's not really helping your cause. You're trying to bring more people together and say, please stop treating us differently. And yet you're not really stepping up to say, hey, we're kind of trying to show love to all people too. So how do you balance this? Yes, we are fighting for something, but there's this racial undertone that I think frustrates a lot of people and distances them and says, I don't want to be a part of this. This is not what we're talking about.
So let's just go back to the modern civil rights movement. I mean, I'm going to trace back this Sunday all the way back to Civil War and what took place there and kind of how things look like they were dealt with but weren't. But let's just take the civil rights movement of the 1960s, late 50s, and through the 60s and even to the present. You have two kind of paradigms of how to deal with that. You've got the Martin Luther King approach, which was one of peace, love, resistance in a peaceful environment. And then you had the Malcolm X, which was much more aggressive and violent. And he mitigated some of his views later on. But the fact of the matter is that kind of movement, it brought a lot of negative attention to the black cause. But the civil rights movement, the reason it got such traction is because of an incredible disciplined message by Martin Luther King that was one of love, and that we are not to be separate people. We're to be one people. We're Americans. And, of course, he was a Christian, so he really talked about being one in Christ. And he had it right. And I think God blessed that, and people understood that. And it really shamed the racism in America, and it made us face that off. But when you have violence, you go, oh, well, you're going to get some violence back. And it just doesn't work. It's not an effective way. So I would say in racial reconciliation, we need to have a clear sound both from blacks and whites, because we're dealing mainly with that tension between blacks and whites. I think there needs to be a clear statement that we do not agree with the violence and the looting and all of that. That is not going to move the cause forward. That's not going to create racial reconciliation.
Do you think that love is being forgotten and being replaced by this idea of if we're black, then we don't like whites or we hate law enforcement? That's been this issue that has kind of brought the issue to the forefront, is black men being shot and killed by white police officers. You have to talk about that if you're going to talk about this movement.
Yeah, I am going to talk about this Sunday. I think there's a thing, what I would call the fool's choice, and I use that a lot because I think it's such a powerful thing. And the fool's choice basically said, if I'm going to support my black friends and brothers and sisters, then I have to hate law enforcement. Or if I'm going to support law enforcement, then I have to be against blacks. That's the problem with this kind of thing. That's a fool's choice. There is actually another view. Law enforcement is essential for our society, and they do a great job. There are some excesses, but when we focus on those few excesses of violence and maybe even racial discrimination, if we so focus on that, we lose track of the risk, the value of law enforcement and their cause and their purpose. So I believe, as a Christian, we can support law enforcement and should, but at the same time, we need to support our black friends and understand the reason some of them have become violent is because they've been worked up. But a lot of people that are violent and very upset are because their conditions as being black in America has been devastating to their lives. And I think they need to know there's a better way.
This is an issue that I feel like we could talk about for a long time. This is going to be a challenge for you, Tim, to see if you can get this message into 30 minutes.
Yeah. So as a white guy, you say, why would you do this? Well, that's why I spent so much time preparing for this. And I think that most people in our church are not aware of the history of slavery and the emancipation of people, black people especially, through the 1860s all the way up to the present. So I'm going to very, very quick overview this Sunday on that, and then I'm going to give 4 things There are essential things that we can do to be a part of racial reconciliation. And I really want our people to come this Sunday. We're going to be online campus as well at gracesd.com. But I think it's really important that people understand the essentials of racial reconciliation to be a part of the cause of Jesus Christ.
Well, kudos to you guys for tackling another social issue. A lot of churches, I think, kind of try to steer away from that because they're controversial. So we look forward to this Sunday's message. We hope you can join us, and we hope you can bring a friend too. We'll see you Sunday.